Close your eyes and imagine the scorching sun hanging over a dusty frontier town, tumbleweeds dancing across cracked earth, and a lone figure broken in body, but not in spirit, struggling to survive. This is the story of Sadi Miller, a disabled cowgirl whose resilience defied the harsh winds of fate. It's the story of how an unexpected hero, a wealthy rancher named Colton Cooper, carried her not only in his arms, but into his fiercely guarded heart. Betrayals, duels, and secrets buried beneath desert sands will rise to the surface. Stay with us and discover how love finds its way in the Wild West. Sadi Miller first appeared on the edge of the old frontier town of Bitterwood when the heat shimmered like molten gold across the desert plains. Her horse had collapsed miles back, a victim of thirst and exhaustion, and her legs, long ago injured in a tragic accident, burned with pain each step she forced herself to take. She walked on crutches, fashioned from worn oak branches, remnants of her life on a small homestead that had been wiped out in a raging wildfire 2 years prior. No one in Bitterwood had seen her arrive. They only noticed her after she collapsed outside the dusty saloon, arms trembling on her improvised crutches. The townsfolk, hardened by years of dealing with drifters, approached cautiously. Her red hair matted with sweat, her eyes sunken from hunger. Sadi looked more ghost than girl. Some whispered about her injuries, how a cowgirl with a mangled leg managed to wander so far alone. Others recalled rumors of renegade bandits or vengeful outlaws. But none of them recognized her name. Tommy Pritchard, the town's grizzled stableman, offered her a ladle of tepid water. It might as well have been the best drink she'd ever tasted. With trembling hands, she managed to swallow. The water reignited a spark of hope in her eyes. She thanked him, with a croak of a voice, and he saw behind all that dust and despair a flash of determination that marked her as a survivor. Years ago, Sadi Miller had been the most promising wrangler in the rolling valleys east of Bitterwood. She'd once taught demonstrations with none other than Annie Oakley, the famed sharpshooter who passed through her father's ranch when Sadi was a teenager. Annie had even praised Sadi's remarkable skill at breaking untamed horses. "You got fire in those veins, girl," Annie had said, patting Sadi's shoulder. In those days, Sadi was unstoppable. She leapt fences on horseback like an arrow cutting through the sky. She seemed destined to become a legend in her own right. But fate had a cruel streak. One day Sadi took a tumble from a skittish stallion she was training. The horse spooked at a rattler's hiss, reared and fell backward, crushing her leg beneath its weight. Doctors from the nearby city of Cheyenne spent days trying to save her limb. They managed to keep her alive, but her leg was shattered beyond full repair. It left her with a heavy limp and a reliance on crutches. As if that weren't enough, a freak accident, an oil lamp tipped during a midnight thunderstorm, burned her family ranch to the ground. She lost her parents, her livelihood, and the only life she had ever known. With no relatives to speak of, she embarked on a lonesome journey, scraping together coin by doing any odd job her body could handle. Ranch hands sometimes pitied her, offering minimal work that matched her abilities. But the West was unkind to those who couldn't stand on 2 feet. Soon, Sadi was left with only her crutches, a stubborn horse named Daisy, and the clothes on her back. For the last 3 months, she had roamed from town to town, desperate for a chance to survive. Bitterwood was notorious for being a rough place. Outlaws often used the outskirts to hide stolen cattle before rushing them to distant markets. Marshal Bill Hollister tried to keep order. But with meager resources, he did his best by focusing on the bigger threats. Day-to-day life was dictated more by the saloon keeper, the blacksmith, and the general store owners, people with enough grit and perseverance to hold the community together. Strangers were usually met with suspicion. When Sadi collapsed, a few folks gathered around, eyes filled with a blend of pity and wariness. A scrawny boy named Amos tugged at his mother's apron, whispering that the lady looked like she needed help. "Hush, Amos," she hissed, but the child's concern was genuine. Eventually, curiosity overcame suspicion. Old Widow Jenkins offered Sadi a cot in her tiny boarding house, a single room that smelled of mothballs and stale tobacco. "You can stay for a week," the widow said, "but you best find a way to pay or move on." Barely able to stand, Sadi nodded, grateful for any kindness. Over the next few days, she scoured Bitterwood for a job that might let her earn at least enough for bread. She could sew a bit brake horses in a pinch if they weren't too wild, and even tried her hand at playing cards, though she wasn't very lucky. Each day seemed bleaker than the last, but still she pressed on. On the 5th day of her stay, while Sadi was buying a meager supper at the general store, she overheard two cowpokes discussing a wealthy rancher named Colton Cooper. Rumor had it Cooper owned acres of prime grazing land north of Bitterwood, employing dozens of ranch hands. He'd come from a well-respected family out in Montana and had recently expanded into these parts, purchasing several smaller ranches that had fallen on hard times. Some folks whispered he had a heart of gold, helping families in need. Others said he was a cold-hearted businessman who saw opportunities where others saw tragedy. Sadi filed the name away. Maybe this man needed help with mending fences or clerical work at his ranch. Even though she was a cowgirl at heart, she couldn't handle the heavy tasks anymore. But maybe he had a ranch office or needed livestock records kept. That very evening, Sadi mustered her courage and asked around until she located Cooper's property. On borrowed horse and with a pounding heart, she made the journey. Once she arrived, she realized Colton Cooper's ranch was more like a small kingdom. Tall fences, orderly barns, and healthy herds of cattle stretched across the horizon. She rode up to the main house, a sprawling, white-painted structure that gleamed in the moonlight. Tying her borrowed horse to the hitching post, Sadi approached the front porch on her crutches, feeling the weight of her vulnerability. A ranch hand answered her knock. He looked taken aback at the sight of a skinny, red-haired woman on crutches, but politely ushered her inside to wait. The foyer was lavish by frontier standards, painted walls, polished floors, and large windows. Sadi had never seen such comfort in the West. Moments later, Colton Cooper emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a crisp white shirt with a string tie. He removed his hat as a courtesy. His features were strong, a square jaw, unruly dark hair, and deep-set green eyes that seemed to read people like a ledger. For a heartbeat, Sadi forgot her practiced speech. "Yes, ma'am," he asked politely. She cleared her throat. "I'm looking for work." "Mr. Cooper." His gaze dropped to her leg, then back up to her face. "You think you can handle ranch work like this?" Sadi swallowed her pride. "I can do tasks that don't require too much legwork. Taking care of accounts, organizing inventory, anything. I'm a fast learner." He studied her intently. There was a flicker of sympathy, but also caution. "All right. Come to my office." In Colton's office, a space lined with books about horse breeding, ranching, and even law, Sadi noticed letters stacked neatly on the desk. A lamp cast warm light across the polished surface. She could smell leather and tobacco. She stiffened her shoulders, trying to appear confident, despite the throbbing ache in her leg. "Miss Miller," he began after she introduced herself. "I'd normally have no trouble finding work for someone in need. But you must understand, my ranch is in a precarious position. I've expanded quickly. Some folks in town aren't pleased with that." Sadi nodded. "So I've heard. But please give me a chance. I can read, write, and keep inventory. I know horses. I know what it's like to lose everything. Let me prove I can be useful." He tapped a pencil on his desk, thinking. Finally, he sighed. "All right, I'll give you a trial run as an assistant in my stables, managing feed schedules, organizing breeding logs, that kind of thing. We'll see how you do for 2 weeks. If it works out, we'll talk longer term. The pay's modest, room and board included." Her heart leapt. Modest pay was better than no pay, and room and board meant she wouldn't have to return to the cramped boarding house. "Thank you," she breathed. She found herself oddly grateful to this man, who could have easily turned her away like so many others had. He nodded curtly. "I'll have one of my men show you to a small cabin near the stables. It's not grand, but it's private and has the basics." As she left, she couldn't help but notice how he kept his distance, as though he'd built a fortress around his emotions. For Sadi, it was enough. She had a foothold, a chance to survive without begging. Maybe, just maybe, she could build a new life here. The cabin turned out to be a modest single-room structure with a little bed in one corner, a wood stove in another, and a wash basin by the window. It was cleaner than any place Sadi had stayed in for months. Even as her body ached from exhaustion, she sank onto the bed and felt tears of relief at having a roof over her head. The next day at dawn, she reported to the stables. The ranch's head groom, a wiry man named Buck Thompson, greeted her with a skeptical glance. "Mr. Cooper says you'll be taking care of feed logs and breeding schedules," he said. "Come with me." He showed her the ledgers filled with dates of when each mare was bred, the feed variety for each stallion, and the medical treatments administered to the horses. It was more extensive than Sadi expected, but she felt a wave of excitement. This was horse knowledge, something she inherently understood. She spent hours reading through the records, marking mistakes, making suggestions. By noon, she'd identified at least 3 entries that needed correction to match the veterinarian's instructions. Buck raised an eyebrow when she pointed them out. "Didn't realize you'd be so thorough," he muttered. "Keep it up." In the evenings, she helped with minor tasks like brushing the calmer horses or bandaging small wounds. Her hands, though thin, were deft, and her voice was soothing to skittish animals. After a few days, even Buck had to admit she was doing a fine job, though he never said it outright. The stable hands started offering her extra help when they saw her struggling with her crutches in the hay-strewn aisle. Little by little, Sadi found acceptance among the workers. She was no longer just the crippled girl, but Miss Sadi, the capable caretaker of the logs. Despite the slow, steady progress, Sadi couldn't shake the feeling that she was living on borrowed time. The 2-week trial period loomed in her mind like a storm cloud. Every day she tried her best to excel, hoping for a nod of approval from Colton Cooper. But aside from the occasional polite greeting, he mostly kept his distance. She'd see him riding across the fields, inspecting new fences or checking on grazing cattle. Sometimes she caught a glimpse of him, talking to his foreman under the shade of a tall oak near the bunkhouses. He seemed absorbed in his responsibilities, the ranch's operations a constant weight on his shoulders. One evening, after finishing her stable chores, Sadi hobbled to the main house to ask for more feed receipts. She needed them to reconcile the accounts. She found Colton in the wide porch that overlooked the ranch. Lanterns cast a soft glow on his face as the sky darkened, turning the horizon a fiery orange. He looked over when she approached, setting down a half-empty coffee cup. "Miss Miller, you're working late," he said. Not unkindly. "I just need the feed receipts from last month. Buck said you keep them in your office. I'm trying to get them in order before the morning shift." He nodded. "Good initiative. Come on in." She followed him inside. The contrast between the well-decorated foyer and her humble cabin was stark, but she refused to feel self-pity. Instead, she focused on the task at hand. Once inside his office, he rummaged through a drawer, handing her a bundle of papers. Her eyes traveled over the open ledgers on his desk. "You run a massive operation," she said, softly, trying to break the ice. He nodded, his gaze distant. "It's grown quicker than I expected. Sometimes I wonder if I bit off more than I can chew." She studied his face, noticing the tired lines around his eyes. "Why do you expand so fast?" He hesitated, then exhaled. "After my father passed, I realized time is short. I wanted to make something of myself, build a ranch that could stand the test of time, provide for people, for the community. Maybe do some good." He shrugged, a little embarrassed at his confession. Sadi felt a tug of empathy. He was more than just a rich rancher. There was a depth to him. "You're doing a good thing," she offered, "giving work to folks who'd otherwise struggle. People like me." He froze for a moment, then sighed. "You're different. I usually help folks, but not in the same way. Many said I was a fool for hiring someone who couldn't do physical labor. But I saw something in you, something that reminded me of an old friend." She wanted to ask who that friend was, but sensed he wouldn't answer. Instead, she thanked him for trusting her and left with the receipts. A strange warmth settled in her chest, making her wonder if it was merely gratitude or the start of something more. Word spread among the ranch hands that Sadi had met privately with Colton to discuss records. Though innocent, it fueled whispers among the bunkhouse crew. One of the senior cowboys, Clayton Reeves, a brash man with a taste for whiskey, didn't take kindly to the new hire's closeness to the boss. "She's just a cripple trying to get special favors," he spat one night as the men played cards. "Man like Colton Cooper's gotta have a soft spot for the weak." Buck, who had grown to respect Sadi, slammed his cards down. "Shut your mouth, Reeves. She's done more for this ranch in a week than you have in a month. I've seen her up before dawn double-checking the logs. She's no freeloader." Clayton sneered. "You'd say that, Ann? Wouldn't you, Buck? Let's see how long it takes for her to weasel into the boss's good graces and weasel us out of ours." The tension simmered. Some of the cowboys sided with Buck, acknowledging Sadi's hard work. Others, disillusioned or jealous, sided with Clayton. The conversation turned hostile enough that a couple of them nearly came to blows. Only the arrival of the ranch foreman, a steady older man named Earl Patterson, prevented a fight. Earl reminded them that Mr. Cooper would not tolerate trouble on his property. Sadi, unaware of this brewing jealousy, continued her duties, but soon she noticed the sideways glances from a few cowboys when she crossed the yard. She felt unease settle in her gut. In the Wild West, envy could be as dangerous as a loaded gun. One late afternoon, a dusty rider galloped into the ranch yard. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, a worn coat, and carried himself with confidence. When he dismounted, Sadi nearly dropped the ledger she was carrying. The man introduced himself as Wyatt Earp, a name known far and wide for his days in Dodge City and Tombstone. He had come to Bitterwood on personal business Apparently he and Colton Cooper had met years before. Rumor had it Earp was investigating some stolen cattle that might be connected to the same ring that had plagued Colton's ranch. Colton greeted him with a handshake, offering a place to stay for the night. Over supper, Sadi was invited to join them as Earp seemed oddly curious about her involvement in the ranch. She listened in awe as Earp recounted tales of the Old West. He talked about Dodge City's lawlessness, his friendship with Doc Holliday, and how times were changing. Not so many real frontier towns left, Earp said, pulling out a battered pipe. Civilization's creeping in. Soon enough, railroads and telegraphs will tame even the wildest corners. But there are still outlaws who won't go down without a fight. Heard you got trouble with Rustlers, Colton. Colton nodded. They've struck twice in the last month, always in the dead of night. They're clever, leaving almost no trace. Any help you can give would be welcome. Earp's gaze flicked to Sadi. And you, Miss, how did you come to be part of this operation? Sadi swallowed, caught off guard. I needed work. Mr. Cooper was kind enough to hire me. Wyatt Earp gave a half smile. Sometimes it's the folks who struggle the most that keep everything together. Keep an eye on her, Colton. She might be the best decision you've made. Sadi felt her cheeks burn. She couldn't tell if Earp was teasing or sincere, but there was a confidence in his voice that both comforted and unsettled her. After dinner, as she helped clear the dishes, she caught Colton looking at her with an indecipherable expression. Was it agreement with Wyatt's words, or something else entirely? The next morning, Wyatt Earp rode off with a promise to return if he uncovered anything about the Rustlers. Sadi threw herself into her work, trying to ignore the quickening of her heart whenever she thought of Colton's lingering gaze. She had no time for foolish notions of romance. Survival was her priority. But a ranch can be a place of surprising revelations. A few days later, Buck was leading a particularly ornery stallion from a paddock when the horse reared and jerked its rope free. Buck flew backward, crashing into a fence post. Sadi was walking nearby with her crutches carrying feed notes in her hand. The stallion snorted, eyes wild, hooves pounding the dirt as it threatened to bolt. Without a second's hesitation, Sadi dropped her crutches and whistled sharply, a trick she once used during her best wrangling days. The stallion's ears flicked. It recognized a commanding note in her voice. She inched closer, ignoring the pain in her leg, speaking soft, steady words. By the time two cowboys rushed over ropes in hand, Sadi had already seized the horse's halter, calming the stallion with practiced firmness. Buck scrambled up, groaning while the others stood in stunned silence. Sadi's quick reaction had stopped what could have been a disaster, an escaped stallion worth hundreds of dollars. Lord Almighty, Buck muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. I had no idea you could still handle a horse like that, with your leg and all. Sadi shrugged, her voice tinged with pain. A horse doesn't care about my leg. He only cares if I show fear. Just then, Colton arrived on the scene, having witnessed the tail end of the commotion. He dismounted and stared at Sadi, who was leaning heavily on the stallion for support. He wore an unreadable expression, part concern, part awe. You okay? He asked quietly. She nodded, wincing slightly. I'll be fine. He stepped closer gently, placing a hand on her arm to steady her. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and Sadi felt her pulse flutter. Thank you, he whispered, for saving one of my prized stallions and for helping Buck. Sadi swallowed hard and gave a tight smile. This time she didn't push him away when he helped her retrieve her crutches. She wasn't used to leaning on anyone, but somehow with Colton's arm around her shoulder, She felt safer than she had in a long time. After that incident, Colton seemed to make a point of checking on Sadi more often. He asked her questions about the horses, about the ledger system she was updating. She found herself sharing stories of her old ranch, of how she grew up among mustangs and learned to ride almost before she could walk. He in turn confided bits and pieces of his own past. He spoke of his father's ranch in Montana, how it fell on hard times when a cattle disease swept through. "We lost half our herd," he said quietly one afternoon as they stood by the corral fence. "My father never recovered from the financial blow. I vowed I'd rebuild not just for myself, but to honor his memory." Sadi listened, her heart warming to his vulnerability. No longer just a distant employer, he was a man with hopes, fears, and regrets. She realized that behind his stoic exterior lay a man who cared deeply about the people under his roof and apparently about her well-being. Still, she kept her distance, fearing that any emotional entanglement would end in heartbreak. She was damaged goods, her body broken, her life uncertain. A man like Colton Cooper could have his pick of strong, able-bodied women. She had seen the way some of the ranch hands' wives or local townsfolk smiled flirtatiously at him. Why would he want a cripple? Yet every time she saw him, she couldn't deny the rush of warmth that spread through her. She told herself it was foolishness. This was the Wild West after all. Romance was a luxury. Survival came first. Trouble soon made its presence known. A band of rustlers struck the northern fence line late one night, stealing a dozen of Colton's prime cattle. By the time the ranch hands realized, the thieves had vanished into the darkness. The next morning, Sadi woke to an air of tension so thick it felt like a gathering storm. Cowboys rushed around, exchanging heated words about tightening patrols, improving security, and tracking footprints. Marshal Bill Hollister came up from Bitterwood to investigate, but he had few leads. "They cover their tracks too well," he grumbled, a worn star pinned to his vest. "We'll keep looking. But these folks are professionals." Colton seethed, pacing his office with clenched fists. "I can't keep losing cattle like this. It'll ruin me." His voice had a desperate edge, and Sadi's heart ached at the thought of how hard he'd worked to build up his herd. Buck and a few of the more loyal hands volunteered for nighttime patrols. Sadi offered to help in the only way she could, by meticulously reviewing the ranch's records to see if there was a pattern to the thefts. Maybe they always struck certain types of cattle or targeted certain fields. She buried herself in the ledgers, scanning for anything unusual. Late that night, by lantern light in her cabin, she found something odd, a mismatch between the brand inspection logs and the actual counts. A handful of cattle had been tagged incorrectly, possibly an inside job. Alarmed, she realized someone on the ranch might be working with the rustlers. Fear prickled her skin. If her suspicion was true, anyone could be a traitor. Before Sadi could share her discovery, another crisis arose. A massive thunderstorm hit Bitterwood, lightning cracking across the sky. High winds threatened to spook the horses, and the ranch hands scrambled to secure them in the stables. Sadi, though exhausted, joined in, wincing every time she put weight on her leg. As the storm raged, she noticed movement near the far barn, someone sneaking around in the darkness. Her heart hammered. Clutching her crutches, she hobbled toward the figure. Lightning illuminated the silhouette, a man rifling through the tack room. She ducked behind a stack of hay bales, struggling to see who it was. Another flash of lightning revealed the man's face, Clayton Reeves. He was stuffing a saddlebag with something from the supply shelves. Fearful, Sadi tried to back away, but she slipped on the wet ground. Her crutches skittered, drawing his attention. In a blink, he was on her, a knife pressed to her throat. Rain drenched them both, the barn's roof only partially shielding them. "You just couldn't mind your own business, huh?" he hissed. His breath stank of whiskey. "Think you can come in here crippled as a lame horse and get cozy with the boss?" Sadie's heart pounded. She swallowed, struggling to stay calm. "Why are you stealing from the ranch, Clayton?" He laughed, a low, menacing sound. "You don't get it. This ranch isn't as solid as it looks. Colton Cooper's days are numbered, and I'm just making sure I got a piece of the pie before it all goes under." Her voice trembled. "You're the one helping the Rustlers." He pressed the blade closer. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just a man with better opportunities on the other side. You think I care about a cripple and her boss? All I need is enough to skip town." Sadie's mind raced. She had to stall him until someone came, but the roar of the storm drowned any chance of calling for help. She felt the cold steel against her neck and feared that this might be the end. Then suddenly a distant voice shouted her name. Colton. He was searching for her. Clayton's eyes flicked toward the door, a moment of indecision. Sadie acted. She brought her knee up with all the force she could muster, slamming it into his groin. Clayton howled in pain, stumbling back. She scrambled away her injured leg, screaming in protest. The knife sliced across her forearm as she pulled free, drawing blood. Lightning flashed again. That was all the time needed for Colton and Buck, drawn by the commotion, to appear in the doorway. Rain and wind whipped around them as they took in the scene. Clayton snarled, brandishing the knife. Buck lunged, wrestling him to the ground, while Colton hurried to Sadie's side, kneeling in the mud. "Sadie," he cried. "You're bleeding." She fought to stay conscious, pain throbbing from the cut. "Clayton, he's been stealing. For the Rustlers." Colton's eyes blazed with fury as he pulled off his bandana, pressing it to her wound. Outside, thunder boomed, echoing the rage that flashed in Colton's face. Clayton Reeves was locked in an empty grain shed under guard until the marshal could collect him. The storm raged all night, leaving the ranch battered but not broken. Sadie's wound, while painful, was fortunately shallow. Colton summoned the doctor from Bitterwood, who stitched her arm and left instructions to keep the wound clean. For 2 days, Sadie remained confined to her cabin, her arm-bandaged leg propped up on pillows. She felt helpless again, a feeling she loathed. Occasionally she drifted into restless sleep, haunted by nightmares of that knife at her throat. On the 3rd evening she woke to a soft knock on her door. Colton entered, carrying a bowl of stew. He set it on the small table by her bed and sat on a stool, looking almost shy. The lamplight revealed dark circles under his eyes, testament to his worry and long hours running the ranch. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently, glancing at the bandage peeking out from her shirt sleeve. "Tired," she admitted. "Sore, but I'll manage." He looked down at his hands, searching for words. "I was scared," he began, voice tight. "When Buck and I found you, that was the 2nd time I thought I'd lose something precious." Sadie's heart fluttered. "2nd time?" He nodded, eyes distant. "A couple of years ago, I was engaged to a woman named Maria. She died when her carriage overturned on a mountain pass. By the time I reached her, it was too late. I couldn't save her. I vowed never again to let someone I care for slip away." Silence thickened between them. Sadie's heart ached at his confession. She hadn't known he carried that kind of grief. Carefully she reached out, placing her good hand over his. "I'm sorry, Colton. That must have been terrible." He swallowed hard. When I saw Clayton's knife at your throat, I froze. I've lost people I loved before. I don't think I could bear it again." Her cheeks warmed. "Colton," she began softly, "you don't have to worry about me. I'm used to taking care of myself. This is the West. None of us are guaranteed tomorrow. But I do appreciate what you did, what you've done." He lifted her hand to his lips, brushing them against her knuckles. The gesture was tender, so unexpected that tears filled her eyes. She realized in that moment that her heart had already begun to open to him, no matter how much she tried to deny it. With Clayton Reeves taken to Bitterwood's jail, the ranch was momentarily safer. But tension lingered. Who else might be involved with the Rustlers? Colton had to take measures to protect his cattle. Buck and Earl organized night patrols, rotating men to watch each quadrant of the property. Sadi, still weak, stayed in her cabin, reviewing logs for any more discrepancies. Surprisingly, Wyatt Earp returned a few days later, having discovered new intel on the Rustler ring. He confirmed Clayton's testimony. There was a group operating out of the canyons west of Bitterwood. They had a network of informants across the territory. Clayton was just one of many. "They'll try again," Earp warned Colton. "You can count on it. Might even attempt sabotage. Keep your guard up." Sadi overheard the conversation from the porch, a knot tightening in her stomach. Another attack. How much more could they endure? That afternoon, Colton called a ranch meeting with all hands present, except for the watchers on patrol. He thanked everyone for their hard work, for sticking together in these turbulent times. The men murmured in agreement, but apprehension was clear on their faces. Everyone knew the Rustlers wouldn't give up easily. Colton ended the meeting by reminding everyone that loyalty would be rewarded, betrayal punished. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sadi found Colton in the stable, gently grooming one of his favorite mares. She approached on her crutch's arm, still bandaged. "You look tired," she said softly, leaning against the stall door. He gave a weary smile. "Haven't slept well in days. Too much on my mind." She nodded. "I've been thinking. Maybe we can set some traps or post decoys. If the Rustlers think they're stealing prime cattle, but instead find locked pens or spiked gates, it might drive them away." He seemed intrigued. "That's a good idea. Talk to Buck about it. I want us ready if they strike again." Sadi hesitated, then reached out to touch his shoulder. "We'll get through this, Colton. Together." For a moment he leaned into her touch, a slight smile crossing his face. "Together," he echoed. 2 nights later, all hell broke loose. Just before dawn, while a heavy fog blanketed the ranch, the Rustlers launched a surprise attack. They cut through the northern fence, attempting to herd a group of cattle toward the canyon pass. Fortunately, the extra patrols spotted them. Shots rang out in the half-light. The ranch hands scrambled to defend the herd, their shouts blending with the panicked bellowing of cattle. Sadi was roused from sleep by gunfire. Heart pounding, she grabbed her crutches and made her way outside. She saw flashes of muzzle fire in the distance. Shouts and curses echoed in the mist. She could barely make out figures galloping through the haze, chasing after the stolen cattle. Desperate to help, she headed toward the corral, where they kept horses saddled for emergencies. Her leg protested with every step, but she refused to stand idle. She found a small mare, gentle enough for her to ride despite her injury. With trembling arms, she hoisted herself into the saddle. Every muscle screamed, but she managed to spur the mare forward, following the sounds of battle. As she neared the fence line, she saw Colton grappling with a masked rider. The rider's horse reared, nearly throwing the rustler. Colton wrestled him to the ground, but another rustler aimed a rifle in Colton's direction. Time slowed to a trickle. Sadi felt her blood run cold. Without thinking, she urged her mare into a gallop, heading straight for the armed man. She let out a wild yell, causing him to turn just as she collided with him, knocking him off balance. The rifle discharged into the dirt, missing Colton by inches. The impact nearly dislodged Sadi from the saddle, her leg thrashing against the stirrup. She bit back a scream. The rustler fell, cursing and scrambling for his gun. But Colton, now free from his previous opponent, delivered a swift kick, sending the rifle spinning away. Chaos continued as more shots were fired, but the tide turned in the rancher's favor. Buck led a group of men who circled the remaining rustlers, forcing them to surrender or flee. Those who ran melted into the fog, but most were apprehended. By the time dawn broke, the ranch yard was littered with scattered equipment, wounded horses, and shaken men. Marshal Hollister arrived with a posse, promptly taking the captured rustlers into custody. The marshal nodded approvingly at Colton. "You sure put up a fight. If you hadn't been ready, they'd have made off with half your herd." Colton thanked him, too numb to feel relief just yet. He scanned the yard for Sadi. At last, he spotted her hunched over in the saddle, clearly in pain. He rushed to her side. Gently, he lifted her off the mare, ignoring her protests. "You're hurt," he insisted, carrying her as though she weighed nothing. She gritted her teeth, tears of pain threatening to spill over. "It's just my leg," she gasped. "Took a blow when I rammed that rustler." He carried her to the small infirmary room the ranch had set up for such emergencies. A makeshift bed was ready. The ranch's resident nurse, an older woman named Millie, examined Sadi's leg. Fortunately, the old injury wasn't permanently worsened, but she'd torn muscle and would be in pain for weeks. Colton hovered, arms folded, face a mask of worry. "You saved my life out there." Sadi managed a weak smile. "You hired me. Least I could do." He shook his head, eyes brimming with emotion. "You could have been killed, Sadi." She reached for his hand. "I couldn't stand by and watch you get shot." Words hung in the air, the weight of unspoken feelings pressing down on them. At length, Colton simply squeezed her hand and whispered, "Thank you." In the weeks that followed the ambush, the ranch slowly returned to normal operations. The rustler threat had finally been quelled. Those captured were locked away in Bitterwood's jail awaiting trial, and the rest of the gang had scattered once their operation collapsed. Wyatt Earp, satisfied with the outcome, tipped his hat in farewell and rode off to his next pursuit of justice. Sadi's leg required bed rest. Millie insisted she stay put, so she was confined to her cabin. But she continued her clerical work from there, with ranch hands ferrying ledgers to and fro. Though isolated, she was never truly alone. For Colton visited her daily. He brought news, fresh fruit from the orchard, and the occasional bouquet of wildflowers. Despite her protests, he'd gently fluff her pillows, ensuring her comfort. Their conversations shifted from ranch matters to more personal topics. Colton confessed the lonely nights he spent after Maria's death, how he'd thrown himself into work to escape the pain. Sadi opened up about losing her parents in the fire, her feelings of guilt at surviving when they did not. Shared grief created a bond deeper than either had expected. One evening, as fireflies danced outside her cabin window, Colton arrived with a tin of homemade cookies, courtesy of the ranch cook, Mrs. Harvey. Sadi thanked him, offering a seat on the edge of her bed. He obliged, looking suddenly shy. "I've been doing some thinking," he began softly. "About you. About us." She stared down at her bandaged leg, her heart racing. "Colton, hush," he murmured, lifting her chin so their gazes locked. "I'm not asking for anything you don't want to give. But you have to know I care about you, Sadi. I haven't felt this way since Maria and I never thought I would again." Tears pricked her eyes. I'm broken, Colton." He shook his head. "You're stronger than anyone I've known. Your spirit, your heart, it's more than enough. I don't care about your leg. I care about you." A sob caught in her throat as she realized how deeply she loved this man. Despite all her fears, her doubts, her scars, he saw her for who she was, not what she lacked. Slowly she lifted her hand to his face, tracing the line of his jaw. In that gentle moment, the outside world faded. She nodded, tears slipping free. Free. "I care about you too," she whispered. "More than I thought possible." He leaned in, brushing his lips against hers. It was a tender kiss, laden with unspoken promises. In that instant, in the soft glow of the lantern light, they found a measure of peace the Wild West rarely granted. News of their growing affection spread through the ranch like wildfire. Some workers grinned knowingly, having witnessed the blossoming closeness. Others, particularly, a few cowboys who had once scoffed at Sadi, muttered that it was improper a rich rancher courting a disabled woman. But Colton dismissed their judgments. He was the boss after all, and no one dared challenge him outright. Tommy Pritchard, the stableman from Bitterwood, who first gave Sadi water, heard the rumor on one of his supply runs. He visited Sadi delivering a new pair of custom-made crutches. "Heard you might be walking down the aisle someday. Soon, Miss Sadi," he teased, winking. She blushed, taking the crutches. "Easy, Tommy. It's not like that. Yet." He shrugged. "Well, these should help you get around better. Consider them a gift for saving my friend Colton's hide." Sadi marveled at the craftsmanship, smooth, sturdy wood, built perfectly to her height. Gratitude and a hint of excitement filled her. What if one day she did stand at an altar, leaning on crutches, waiting for Colton to join her? The thought both thrilled and frightened her. Life had taught her that joy could be snatched away at any moment. That evening she found Colton on the porch sipping coffee. He smiled at her approach, noticing the new crutches. "Those look good," he commented, setting his mug aside. She eased down next to him. They watched the sun dip below the fields, the sky ablaze in oranges and purples. "Tommy brought them. He seems to think we're heading to the altar." Colton chuckled softly, but turned serious. "Sadi, if that's something you'd ever want, I'm not opposed. In fact, I'd welcome it." She glanced at him, heart pounding. Was he proposing already? After all the hardships, could they truly be ready for marriage? She wasn't sure, and yet part of her wanted nothing more than to wake up every day in his arms. Colton pressed on, voice hushed. "Let's not rush. I just want you to know that I see a future with you if you want it." Sadi reached for his hand, twining their fingers. "I do. Let's take it one day at a time. I'm still healing after all." He kissed her hair, relief evident in his gaze. One day at a time. As the weeks rolled by, Sadi's leg improved. She managed to walk short distances without crutches, though it remained painful. She resumed her duties in the stables, which gave her a renewed sense of purpose. The nightmares of that night with Clayton Reeves slowly faded. But ghosts from the past can resurface in the strangest ways. One afternoon, a dusty wagon rattled into the ranch. An older woman named Lucinda Miller stepped down, claiming to be Sadie's estranged aunt from back east. Sadie was stunned. Her mother had once mentioned a sister who left to seek fortune in Chicago, but she'd never known any details. Lucinda was a stern woman with lines etched deeply into her face. She clasped Sadie's hands, tears brimming. "I heard about the fire that took your family's ranch. I couldn't believe you were still alive. I've spent months trying to track you down. Finally, someone in Bitterwood told me you were living here." Sadie wavered between anger and relief. Where was Lucinda? All those years she struggled alone. Colton, standing protectively nearby, sensed her turmoil. Lucinda spoke rapidly, explaining how she'd received word too late, how she'd been caring for an ailing husband who passed away. When she finally settled her affairs, she decided to look for Sadie. "I want you to come with me," Lucinda said earnestly. "Come to Chicago. You can see real doctors get proper treatment. I can give you a better life than this dusty ranch. A city with possibilities for someone with your mind." Sadie felt her stomach churn. Chicago. She pictured tall buildings, busy streets. Yes, there might be better doctors, better job opportunities for someone with a disability. But then she glanced at Colton at the ranch that had become her home. She thought of the open sky, the horses, the sunsets shared on the porch. How could she leave this behind? She told Lucinda she needed time to think. That night she lay awake, torn between a life of security in the city and the wild, unpredictable life she'd come to love here. Colton hadn't said much after meeting Lucinda, but Sadie felt his anxiety. She knew he feared losing her, and truth be told, she feared losing him too. For 3 days, Lucinda stayed in Bitterwood, pressing Sadie to make a decision. The older woman insisted that a city like Chicago would give Sadie a chance to escape the stigma of her disability. "You could be so much more than a crippled ranch hand," Lucinda said bluntly one afternoon. "I have money connections. You deserve better." Sadie bristled. She knew Lucinda meant well, but the words stung. A crippled ranch hand, that's all Lucinda saw. That night, Colton found Sadie in the stable grooming one of the mares. A single lantern illuminated her tired features. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly. She shrugged, tears glistening in her eyes. "I don't know what to do. Part of me wonders if she's right. Maybe I would have a better life somewhere else." Colton gently took the brush from her hand, setting it aside. "I won't keep you here if your heart wants to go. But Sadie, He trailed off, struggling for the right words. "I love you, and I'd do anything to give you the life you deserve. I can hire the best doctors to come here. We can travel to bigger towns for treatment if needed. You don't have to leave everything you love just to find a better life." Sadie's chest constricted. He loved her. Hearing it aloud made her heart soar and ache all at once. "Colton, you've given me a home, a purpose. I never dreamed I could have that again. But if I go to Chicago, maybe I could walk without crutches. Maybe I could—" She hesitated, tears slipping free. "Run again," he guessed, recalling her passion for horses. The longing was clear in her eyes. She nodded shakily. "I miss riding at full gallop, feeling the wind in my hair." He gathered her in his arms, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "If you think it's worth a try, I'll support you. But don't go because you feel trapped or because your aunt looks down on what you've accomplished. You're so much more than a crippled ranch hand, Sadie. You're the heart of this ranch. And of me. She closed her eyes, letting his warmth soothe her. Deep down, she knew her heart belonged on this land with this man. And yet the possibility of walking without pain of riding again, could she really turn that down? 22. The final choice. Morning dawned bright and clear. Lucinda was set to leave Bitterwood by noon. Sadie made her way to the boarding house where her aunt stayed, her heart thudding with each step. Lucinda greeted her with a hopeful smile. "Please tell me you've decided to come with me," Lucinda said, eyes flicking to Sadie's crutches. Sadie took a breath, recalling the moment she'd tamed the stallion, the nights spent laughing with ranch hands, and most importantly, Colton's unwavering support. "I'm sorry, Aunt Lucinda. I can't leave. This is my life now." Lucinda's face fell, but she pursed her lips, nodding curtly. "You're making a mistake. You're choosing a man over your own well-being." Sadie shook her head, voice firm. "I'm choosing my home, my new family, and the man who loves me for who I am. A city might offer fancy hospitals and new treatments, but my heart belongs here. And I believe there's a future for me, even if I never walk without crutches." Lucinda glared anger, mingling with sadness. "You're a fool, Sadie Miller. But it's your choice." With that, Lucinda gathered her belongings and climbed into the wagon. As she drove away, Sadie felt a surge of relief tinged with sadness. She'd lost another piece of family, but this time it was by choice. Yet she felt certain she'd done the right thing. Colton found her standing on the porch, watching the wagon disappear into the horizon. He placed his arm around her shoulder. "How do you feel?" She leaned against him. "Free," she said, softly. "Ready to build a future here, if that's what you still want." He turned her to face him, hands cupping her cheeks. "I can't imagine my future without you." Their kiss beneath the warm morning sun felt like the start of a new chapter. The weeks that followed were filled with a sense of renewal. With the Rustler threat gone and Clayton's betrayal dealt with, the ranch steadied its course. Sadie, fully integrated into the operations, found a new role teaching younger hands how to handle skittish horses. Her reputation as the best wrangler, even with a disability, spread across Bitterwood. Local ranchers came for advice, impressed by her methods and gentle approach. Colton expanded the ranch's stables, investing in better equipment and improved fencing. He invited a traveling veterinarian to stay for a month, giving Sadie and the ranch hands hands-on lessons in equine care. Sadie thrived, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. Their bond deepened. Each evening, Colton and Sadie shared dinner on the porch, watching the sun set over the grazing cattle. They spoke of dreams raising prime horses, maybe even training them for cavalry or stagecoach lines. Sadie envisioned a future where her experience could lead to a specialized breeding program, forging the ranch's reputation far and wide. Sometimes, though, she still wrestled with self-doubt. Could she truly be the partner Colton deserved? He reassured her time and again, reminding her that everyone carries scars, some visible, some hidden. "Yours don't define you," he'd say, kissing the scar on her forearm. On a balmy summer evening after a long day sorting cattle, Colton led Sadie to a quiet spot by the creek. Wildflowers lined the banks, and the fading sun bathed the sky in warm hues. He spread a blanket beneath an old willow tree, the soft sound of water creating a peaceful lull. They chatted about horses' orchard plans and bunkhouse gossip, but Sadie sensed something more. Colton fidgeted, then turned to her eyes filled with purpose. "Sadie Miller," he began, voice steady. "I thought I'd never love again. But you healed parts of me I didn't know were broken. I don't want another day to pass without you knowing. I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Her breath caught. He pulled out a handcrafted silver ring, topped with a single turquoise stone. "It's simple, but it reminded me of your eyes." Tears welled as she whispered, "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring on her finger, and she embraced him, forgetting everything else. As they kissed beneath the fading light, the Wild West held nothing but promise. Word of Sadi and Colton's engagement spread quickly through Bitterwood. Where once there had been skepticism, there was now celebration. Sadi had proven her worth, not just through hard work, but through courage, loyalty, and love. Now she was set to become the mistress of the largest ranch in the region. They planned a modest but heartfelt ceremony in the orchard. Invitations went out to friends, ranchers, townsfolk, and even Wyatt Earp, who promised to attend if possible. On the big day, wild flowers and ribbons decorated the orchard. Sadi wore a simple gown, her hair woven with blossoms, and leaned proudly on crutches adorned with lace. Colton stood at the altar, beaming as she approached. Their vows were spoken from the heart, pledges of love, through droughts, stampedes, and all that life could bring. When the preacher declared them husband and wife, cheers rang out. Under starlight, they danced, Sadi resting against Colton's chest, her crutches briefly forgotten. It was a night neither would ever forget. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the sun-scorched plains and twilit stables of Bitterwood. Sadi Miller's resilience reminds us that no matter how many times life knocks us down, the right person and place can help us stand tall again, even on crutches. Colton Cooper's unwavering love proves that our past losses don't have to define our future. Their story of outlaws, hidden betrayals, and a bond forged in the dusty winds of the Wild West captures the timeless lesson that real strength comes from the heart. If you enjoyed Disabled Cowgirl was starving until a rich rancher carried her to his heart. Please hit that like button, share this tale with friends who appreciate stories of triumph, and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming dramas from the rough and tumble days of the Old West. Until next time, happy trails.